Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me all right? Excellent. My name is Melissa Wertheimer, and I'm so excited that you are joining me today in the Gertrude Clark Woodall Pavilion in the Jefferson Building at the Library of Congress. I wanted to first orient you to the space and then also orient you to myself a little bit. Since we're a nice intimate group and this is all about getting intimate with primary sources, I'd like for this to just really have a nice kind of casual flow. The structure of today, I will give you a presentation and I will also let you know what is on display. There will be a few minutes for questions, and then I want to give you guys ample time to just explore the exhibit that I've curated for you today. So the space that you are in was built in 1938 with the generosity of Gertrude Clark Woodall and her foundation. She is also responsible for the unsurpassed collection to your left of Stradivarius, Guarneri, and Amati instruments. Those instruments have also been beautifully photographed and are online for you on our digital collections, loc.gov/collections. You can see the backs of the instruments. You can get up close and zoom into the grain. It's really stunning. And also this room is home to a very small sample, most of which is hidden behind this screen here, but some are in the back, samples from the Dayton C. Miller flute collection. It is the largest collection of flutes in the world. Because I'm a flutist, I have to give the little plug. Dayton C. Miller was a physicist and an acoustician, and he ran the physics department at Case Western University. His collection came to us in 1941, and it's not just instruments, and they do actually represent flutes from all around the world, various Native American traditions in this country, flutes from Asia, flutes from Africa, flutes from the Western classical tradition, also other woodwinds, clarinets and recorders. There's even a double flageolet hiding behind this TV over here. So there's also iconography, books about music, books about flute making. So this is a very special space to be in, to talk about music and to enjoy the history of DC in particular. So, like I said, my name is Melissa, and I started at the Library of Congress Music Division only 7 months ago as a reference librarian. Before I was at the Library of Congress, I was kind of bouncing around a little bit with various project archivist positions at the Baltimore Museum of Art, the Walters Art Museum, the Peabody Institute, and the University of Maryland, College Park. My background is, and still is, as a professional flutist and piccoloist. I taught flute at Howard Community College in Columbia, Maryland for a little under a decade, and also music history and appreciation at Johns Hopkins University to music minors and students not majoring in music. So being here today really represents what I love most, which is anybody who just is slightly interested in music to the people who live music every day, where we can talk about what makes it so important to us, what we think is cool, the little niches that we can just kind of dig in together, and just really bringing enthusiasm in a room together about music. So today is Declassified, which is when music specialists really pull out all the stops and pull out all of these primary sources that you can see. I've gone a little wild here today, pulling out fun things for you. Women Composers Hiding in Plain Sight. It is a meaningful title, and I chose it because it has a double-edged sword a little bit. Hiding in plain sight, when you think of that, you think about something that is just right in front of you, but you don't know what it is, or you'd miss it somehow. That's because we're going to be talking about a glass negative today. That has been digitized by the Prints and Photographs Division. It is in the custody of the Prints and Photographs Division. It's part of a massive gift collection from the National Photo Company collection. And it's up online. You can find it, but only if you know previously, only if you knew how to find it. And as librarians and archivists, something that's very important to us is thinking about what we collect, if we collect something, what we select, or if we select something from that larger collection, what and if and how we describe something. When we talk about description in libraries and archives, you may hear words get thrown around like descriptive metadata or cataloging or terms like that. And that's what we talk about when we say description. And description is how librarians and archivists make objects and collections visible. And we're in a time right now in the music world and the larger world too, where visibility is an important topic. It is a big topic that we're all talking about with various cultures, religious groups, types of people, causes. And so visibility really comes to the fore when we're talking about cultural heritage. And the Library of Congress is here to preserve and make available cultural heritage. So I want you all to keep in mind today this theme of visibility and what we all do, either when we try to make ourselves visible to other people, or what we do in our daily lives with bringing things that are important to us. How do we describe them to make them visible? So let's keep that in mind today. So first, this is all going to start off by talking about a little adventure I had when I first started here 7 months ago. My supervisor, Robin Rausch, generously arranged tours of every single reading room in the library for me as a new employee. And part of that orientation was an orientation to the Prints and Photographs division. And there was a tool that I learned about at that orientation called PPOC. That's the acronym. It stands for Prints and Photographs Online Catalog. And it's available to all of you. The Prints and Photographs division maintains their own catalog, which is separate from the regular online catalog that you all may use to find objects at the library. So I said to myself, well, you know, in the name of getting to know this overwhelmingly new place, and in the name of trying to just get to know what other resources other divisions have that relate to music so I can be the best reference librarian that I could be, I said, hey, why not just punch in a search term and see what comes up? And lo and behold, my third search result was pretty wonderful, and it is the reason we're actually all here today. I just started typing in women composers because I had already messed around in PPOC, just plugging in the very specific names. You know, oh, do they have any images of Vaslav Nijinsky? Do they have any images of Sergei Diaghilev? Do they have any images of so-and-so? And so I said, okay, well, what'll happen if I do something broader? And there it was, search result number 3. And yeah, that red writing, the what, that is what I said at my computer screen at my desk that day. So this was the search that started it all. So in PPOC, when you click on a record, it shows you the digitized image. It gives you really wonderful acquisitions information, so the descriptive information that I had shared with you earlier. But what really intrigued me about this image is that the women were not named in it. It had a title, Women Composers, 4/23/24. But in any other group photo I saw in PPOC, the groups, either the groups were named or the individuals were named. There was a lot more information, and so it actually struck me that this didn't have a lot of information. But right off the bat, I said to myself, that woman in the middle has got to be Amy Beach. And so I said to myself, whoops, sorry about that. I said to myself, you know, the National Photo Company collection, which is where this digitized glass negative came from, only documented cultural events in Washington, D.C. So that means this image was taken in Washington, D.C. So my goal was to figure out who these women were, to expand the descriptive information in the catalog record so that this moment could be made available, searchable, findable, and documented for scholars, for other women who compose, for anyone just curious about the history of women's struggles in this country. So what I found was that these women were in Washington, D.C. for the 1924 biennial convention of the National League of American Pen Women. And it took place at the Shoreham Hotel, still exists up in Northwest DC, although now it's called the Omni Shoreham. And they were here to be members of the National League of American Pen Women. The organization was founded in 1897 because women were not allowed to be members of the American Press Club. So it started off as being a way for women journalists to come together, and then it also very quickly expanded their membership to include all women of letters, creative women, so artists, poets, writers, and composers as well, because at this time it was difficult, albeit, almost entirely impossible for women to even join ASCAP, the American Society for Composers, Authors, and Publishers. Although one of the ladies we're going to talk about today did eventually join ASCAP a few years after this photo was taken. So my biggest resources for finding out information were going to be newspapers, and I'm definitely indebted to my supervisor, Robin, for making that immediate suggestion. She said, well, if this was about women in DC, the society pages are going to have a lot for you. And that was one of the places I started looking. So as far as the League of American Pen Women, this didn't occur in a vacuum. And something I want to emphasize today is that these women were incredibly famous in their lifetimes. And there's a reason that the organization founded. So a little bit of a history lesson, because we're here to talk about a historic moment. Here's a sample of discourse of the time. 1880, and we do have a copy of this book here. The cover is much prettier than its contents. How is it that woman, that singularized, tokenized term, that woman, with all these attributes of music in her nature, so we're talking about being gentle and being a muse, all these attributes of music in her nature, is receptive rather than creative. That's the tone of that book right there. So again, enjoy the binding. So 1897, there seems to be a tendency in some minds to make a great deal of the fact that a piece of music is written by a woman. It must be because the novelty has not worn off. What we really want and will eventually have is unprejudiced and therefore fair treatment. This is published in the Etude. We have two volumes of the Etude on display here. The Etude was published by Theodore Presser, a music publisher still in business today, based in Philadelphia. And the Etude was actually geared more for pedagogy. So you actually have a lot of issues dedicated to women, 1909, 1918, called Women's Issues or the Woman Number. And so you get a lot of women writing in because they're told that their vocation, their aim, as teachers, that's going to be the way women can be professional in music, is in a caretaker capacity of nurturing others, meaning young men, to go on and do musical things. So at least they're allowed in a profession. But this woman, Cora Stanton Brown, this was a letter to the editor kind of section. I still shake a little bit when I think that she's writing this in 1897, that when she says, it must be because the novelty has not worn off. So maybe that can stick with you. 1904, we have this book here on display for you to take a look at. Arthur Elson, Woman's Work in Music. So again, we're still dealing with that kind of singular tokenized term a little bit, but his words are, they give us hope retrospectively. The question of allowing women to compose, if they wish to do so, is hardly one that needs any extended debate. Yet it is only in the last few decades that women's inalienable right to compose has been fully established. I like that he uses the term inalienable right, especially considering we're in the Jefferson Building at the Library of Congress. But so he really gets in, this. He's saying, okay, this is normal. Can we stop debating this? 1904, okay, 1910. In the Musical Times, which is published in London, this article is fantastic. I highly recommend that you get yourself to a reading room, get a reader card, and use any of our online historical newspaper databases and read this article by Ernest Newman. It actually did get reprinted in the Etude because the Etude wanted American readers to read this article. Until women have had the opportunity of working for a few generations under the same social and economic conditions as men composers, and have then failed to produce a work of unmistakable genius, it is surely the most superficial dogmatism to say that they have no creative gift merely because they are women. This article is fantastic. He's getting to the core of what it was. When you think of Fanny Mendelssohn, when you think of Clara Schumann, there were social and economic barriers. We can apply this to today when we're talking about barriers put up for people of various cultures having opportunities or not in this country, whether they be creative, whether they have to do with voting. So this still holds true, and this is 1910. Only 8 years later, British women aged 30 who owned property could vote. And then 1920, white women in this country could vote. And not until 1928, women over 21 in Britain could vote. So this is the time that we're talking about. There's a lot going on here. So when we're talking about a 1924 glass negative of women coming together for a women's professional organization, saying we are women composers, we are here, this is right on the wave of a big time for women. So, the reasons we are here. There were 2 concerts that week during that League of American Pen Women convention. The first concert was Wednesday, April 23rd, 1924 at 9 p.m. in the Shoreham Hotel Lounge. I found out about this through a newspaper article before I found the concert program, and this concert program is on display for you to take a look at today. Then, another newspaper article called Radio Programs Today is what let me know there was actually a second concert, Friday, April 25th, 1924, at 8:30 p.m. in the Arts Club of Washington, and it was broadcast live on the radio, WCAP. So this concert program makes me really happy because we actually have 2 copies, and we're going to talk about how those 2 copies differ later today. You may notice in the lower left-hand corner of the cover, in pencil, is a call number. And this program was a gift to the music division, and we actually have a great deal of uncatalogued concert programs, not only for Washington, D.C., but all over the country, and a really rich collection of them from this time in the early 20th century. And even though they were all gifts of the same person, the archival best practices that we know now for keeping things that come in together, that wasn't really in existence yet. I mean, the National Archives didn't form until the early 1930s, so we're still dealing with a time where things get cataloged individually. So for better or worse, it was a little difficult to find this program, but I did, and most of our DC concert programs were all gifts of this individual. So let's put some names to faces. And I apologize for the pixelizing. I wanted to really zoom in. So something that made identifying these women a little difficult was that not all of them were photographed around this time. I was trying to do a lot of image searching to just do comparison images. Just to say, well, could this person's face be the same as this person? But of course, the newspaper articles were really helpful because it immediately zoomed in a lot of results, and it was really just a matter of saying which person at which place in the photo, other than Amy Beach, is this woman. So all the way on the left, we have Phyllis Fergus. And Phyllis Fergus was active mostly in Chicago. She was the first musician to be president of the National League of American Pen Women in 1936. And on display, I have 2 letters from her to Elizabeth Sprague Coolidge. Our auditorium and our concert series are because of her. And leading up to her time as president, where she was the chair of the music group in the Pen Women. In the 1930s, she arranged 2 Pen Women concerts at the White House. She seems to be the least represented in our collections as primary sources are concerned, but we do have a large number of published music from copyright deposits. Again, she was very famous in her lifetime. She was published by some pretty major publishers, Clayton Summy and Schirmer. Ethel Glenn Hier, looking next, she was a 1926 founding member of the Society of American Women Composers. So that's 2 years after this photo was taken. So that really tells you how important this moment was, because just 1 year after this photo was a huge Women Composers Festival in DC. And then the year after that, in 1926, is when we get the Society of American Women Composers. So this was a moment. I can't emphasize that enough. She attended the Cincinnati Conservatory and Juilliard, but back then it was called the Institute of Musical Art. And she held 14 fellowships at the MacDowell Colony. 14. She was very busy. So she had a very strong relationship with the MacDowells, and that's represented by items that are on display on that table over there. She was published also by Clayton Summy, also by Gilbert Music, so these were Chicago publishers. She was a very gifted pianist and also a composer. In the middle, we have Amy Beach, and she's described in her lifetime as the Dean of American Women Composers. It's a wonderful term, although it does give me pause, because today when we talk about Aaron Copland, we call him the Dean of American Composers. So there's that little bit of a difference. I just thought I'd put that out there. But needless to say, of the 5 women in this photo, she was by far the most famous in her lifetime and remained famous as the decades went on. These other women kind of fell into obscurity for various reasons. But Amy Beach's legacy has very much stayed to the fore. She was born in New Hampshire. She was incredibly active in Boston as a pianist. She was a child prodigy. And also in 1926 was a founding member of the Society of American Women Composers. She was their first president. And then next over is Harriet Ware, born in Wisconsin, active in New York City. She died in New Jersey, also a child prodigy like Amy Beach. Her music studies were kind of all over: Minnesota, New York City, Berlin, Paris. A lot of these women needed to go abroad to get educated and also to get their performing careers started. Harriet Ware founded her own publishing firm for music in 1926. A lot of our copyright records in the US Copyright Office were submitted. The claimant was Harriet Ware Publishing. She was a music chairman of the League of American Penwomen. And in 1927, the General Federation of Women's Clubs made her Woman's Triumphal March their official song. So that's something pretty interesting about her. She was published by major publishers in her lifetime before she founded her own firm. She was published by Carl Fisher, by Schirmer, Harold Flammer, and John Church. She was also published by Arthur P. Schmidt, who was Amy Beach's main publisher until he died in 1921. And then last but not least, we have Gena Branscombe. She was born in Canada and lived in Chicago briefly for a time and then was mostly active in New York City. Her music studies were in Chicago, Berlin, and New York City. She was not only a composer and arranger and pianist, but also a conductor. She even founded her own chorale, the Branscombe Chorale, which existed from 1933 to 1954. She was chair lady of the New York State Federation of Music Clubs from 1930 to 1935. She was also a 1926 founding member of the American Society of Women Composers, and she was their second president after Amy Beach. So also what you see is that the women in this photo know each other professionally, and that's also very important. So when you're looking at a photo of a group, sometimes you say not only why are they together, where are they together, when are they together, but what brought them together and what other ties, what other dynamics. So photos really are worth 1,000 words. Someone who is not in this picture, but that we will talk about today, is another composer, Mary Turner Salter. She's still known among vocalists for her art songs. She was born in Illinois. She was a soprano and a composer and a pianist. She taught voice at Wellesley, and she was another composer published by Arthur P. Schmidt. One of her pieces, The Cry of Rachel, was made incredibly famous by the soprano Ernestine Schumann-Henke. Do we have any old opera lovers here? So yeah, so she made that piece incredibly famous, and it was dedicated to her. Mary Turner Salter was also a founding member of the Society for American Women Composers, also published by Schmidt. and additionally Shermer and Arthur Ditson. These were not publishers that picked up women just to fill out their roster. They picked it up because the music was quality and that these women could produce. So you can see at the bottom bullet point here, my deduced location to expand Washington, D.C. I think it might be McPherson Square. Now, I'm not a historical D.C. Expert. If this photo were taken in Baltimore, I can tell you right off the bat where this was. But the equestrian statue in the photo is really going to be the key. I have yet to get to the D.C. Historical Society, but I plan on doing a little more research there to figure out where this was. Even though we know these women came together for an event at the Shoreham, this photo was not taken at the Shoreham. Now, remember when I said other photos were helpful? Sometimes you gotta be a little wary because sometimes things can be a little too good. I found this on a Google image search from a stock photo company. And the caption made me so excited that then I got a little nervous because it says, Amy Beach with 4 American female songwriters in April 1924, Harriet Ware, Gena Branscombe, Mary Turner Salter, Ethel Glenn Hier, and Amy Beach. So to put a name to a face, we were talking about how Mary Turner Salter was not in the glass negative that we're talking about today. She is seated in the center. So even though Amy Beach was career-wise the most senior of these women, Mary Turner Salter was the most senior in age. Now, I've been in touch with the photo company that posted this to the stock photo website. All they said to me was, oh, we have no record of where we got this photo from. All we can tell you is that in 2006, that's when we uploaded it to the stock photo website. So if it says April 1924, I can only hope that this was taken at the Arts Club or the Shoreham. I mean, these women, they're all wearing corsages, which means they were guests of honor. So we can hope, we can wish. I want to track down the original. I don't know where to begin, but I will try because I want to know where they got this photo from because it's too relevant. So this is brand new to my presentation as of yesterday. A Branscombe scholar, Kathy Shimeda, who is here today, brought this to my attention in the reading room just this week in the Arthur P. Schmidt Company archives. We have written correspondence proof that helps us figure out the timeline of the planning of the concerts that happened when this photo was taken. Her handwriting is a little difficult, so I'll read you a transcription. P.S. I forgot to say, this is in February 1924. Remember, the photo was taken in April, so not too many months of planning. P.S. I forgot to say, I've just had an interesting letter from Mrs. Dorothy DeMuth Watson. She was the chair lady of the convention for the Penn Women that year, asking me to join the League of American Penn Women. All sorts of interesting people belong, to come along to Washington in April and have my things performed with Mrs. Beach, Harriet Ware, and Faye Foster at the convention. Tea at the White House, a luncheon with President Coolidge presiding. Won't it be fun? I'm as thrilled as a child at Christmas. So not only does this tell us a little bit more in terms of the timeline of the planning of this concert, but we also learn that this was the first time that Gena Branscombe was a member of the Penn Women. So that also tells us a little bit more about her relationship with the organization. And you can see her initials, GBT. The T, she hyphenated her last name when she got married to Branscombe Tenney. So I love this postcard because something I was having a lot of trouble finding here at the library was correspondence to give us more supporting evidence because I've been relying so heavily on newspapers. So this is the gem to me. So thank you, Kathy. So resources that I used to figure out what was going on in that photo, the contextual information, who the women were. The Music Division General Collections, that's where the sheet music, the printed sheet music is from. that you will see in the exhibit. It is where the periodicals, the printed periodicals, are from, as well as the books. So those are our general collection materials. Our special collections, so these are collections where, because of provenance, we keep everything together. These are collections with a variety of materials, and this is just an abbreviated list, really, of resources that I'd used from the music division, in addition to the Prints and Photographs division's National Photo Company collection. And institutional records actually are really helpful. In the music division, we have a non-collection collection called Music Division Old Correspondence. And a lot of it is really a who's who correspondence list because of how closely tied Elizabeth Sprague Coolidge and her foundation were to the music division in its early days. So there's a lot of correspondence with our chiefs of the music division and Elizabeth Sprague Coolidge and performers and conductors and composers. That's where you find, Darius Milhaud and Martha Graham and all kinds of famous people. And it's not because it came in with a collection, it's because that was how we did business. And then, of course, like I said, miscellaneous internet image searches, which may or may not be reliable. So let's look at our entire cast of characters, because since we know that there were 2 concerts, the composers were not alone, and because this is so DC specific, I think it's really great that we can look a little deeper into who else was involved with the 2 concerts. So, who, what, where, when? We have Gretchen Hood, who performed as a soprano. The abbreviations under the performances category: Shoreham 423, so that was concert number 1 that took place at the Shoreham on April 23rd. WCAP 425, that's the broadcasted concert from the Arts Club 2 days later on April 25th. So Gretchen Hood was involved in both concerts as a performer. The Washington Post on April 20th, 1924, while promoting the concerts and the Penwomen, said that Gretchen Hood, quote, is one of the most interesting sopranos in the city at the present time. So something else we're going to learn as we discuss more and more about these people, the performers, is that not only were the composers themselves famous in their lifetime, but these performers that were involved were also the cream of the crop at the time, which shows you the regard that was given to the composers. Next up, we have Flora McGill-Kiefer, mezzo-soprano, also involved in both performances. Flora McGill-Kiefer was a DC-based choir and concert singer, very active in the Friday Morning Music Club, which still exists, by the way, and something that I have curated over there for you, we have programs from the Friday Morning Music Club featuring Flora McGill-Kiefer, and it actually shows you how many decades she was truly involved with the organization. And she had early training in Chicago and then abroad. She recorded for Victor early in her career. Now we have Warren Lee Terry, a tenor. I had trouble finding information about him. I couldn't find an obituary. So I know he was active in DC, 20s, 30s, 40s. And there are a lot of articles that document his performance career, but I can't find an obituary to verify a birth date or a death date yet. The research is still continuing. So he was a church soloist in DC. I know that from an article in October 1930 in New York City, he shared a recital with Harry T. Burleigh. He was a Gilbert and Sullivan specialist. He performed in the Chautauqua Opera, the New York Opera Comique, and the Metropolitan Comic Opera Company. So his thing was definitely more comic opera rather than, grand lyric opera. So that gives you an idea of who he was. John Marvell, I also had trouble finding information about him. He was a baritone. Again, an active church soloist, local recitalist in DC, active in the 20s and 30s. I had some trouble finding information about him. Marjorie Marcus Fisher, she's great. I could not find a death date for her. However, she was a violinist that came for the first concert from San Jose, California. Later on in her career, she became a music critic and a journalist. She was a music correspondent for Musical America and the music critic for the San Francisco News. She also patented a chin rest for violinists in 1937. Pretty cool. So it was supposed to be a special chin rest that allowed the instrument to vibrate more freely. So she's pretty interesting. I think she's very special. So she came from very far to come and perform on this concert. Next we have Julius Falk, and the press, I haven't really found an authoritative version of his name. Sometimes it's Julius, sometimes it's Jules. So he is most famous today, actually, for the Stradivarius violin that he owned. You find a lot written about him in violin trade journals, historic violin trade journals. He owned a 1723 Stradivarius that is currently owned and played by the Russian violinist Victoria Malova, which she purchased in 1985 from Sotheby's. Julius Falk was Philadelphia-based, and he was also one of the earliest members of the first violin section of the Philadelphia Orchestra. He joined that orchestra at age 17 in the first violin section. So that's why there's actually a dual birth date, because the article that I found listing him in the personnel of the Philadelphia Orchestra, it was their second season. And so I'm not sure if he was age 17 for the second season or the first season. So that's why he's either 1883 or 1884, but I do know from his obituary he did die in 1957. Next up is Richard Lorleberg, a cellist. He was born in Hanover, Germany, and he studied cello with his father in Leipzig, and his father himself was a famous cellist. His father played solo recitals for Kaiser Wilhelm II and Queen Victoria. The family came to Baltimore in 1904. Baltimore historically had a very large German immigrant population. And then he became DC-based in 1910. He was also incredibly active in the Friday Morning Music Club, and I have programs over there from the beginning of his time in DC. He performed pretty often in various European embassies in DC, so you can imagine him, schlepping his cello case around DuPont. And also, he played at President Taft's funeral in 1930, and for one season was a member of the National Symphony Orchestra, the 1932-33 season. And the Washington Herald in 1910, so right when he's fresh to the DC music scene, said, "Mr. Lorleberg not only plays with artistic finish as far as technique is concerned, but his interpretation is unusually brilliant." So again, these are performers that are the cream of the crop for the time. And we did go over very brief and not justice-supplying biographies of our composers, who, by the way, all performed as pianists on these recitals. They accompanied their own works, and Amy Beach also played as a soloist. So, like I said, obituaries were really helpful, but obituaries were also helpful with putting names to faces. So we have a picture of Flora McGill Kiefer, all the way on the left. So she did, her obituary, sadly, the headline is "Suicide Certificate is Issued in Death of Mrs. Kiefer," but the article does tell us about her. We also have a beautiful photo of Gretchen Hood, our soprano. And so you can see that Julius, or Jules Falk, his obituary has him listed as Jules, but a lot of the articles during his career said Julius. So like I said, it's still not confirmed which one it is. And then we have a picture of Mr. Lorleberg over there. And sometimes, to find out what some of these performers looked like, it maybe wasn't in an obituary, but something else entirely. So there is a picture of Warren Lee Terry, our tenor, our Gilbert and Sullivan man. So that's a picture of him later in life, because that's 1945, and he died in 1957. And there's a caricature of Jules Falk. However, that drawing is from almost exactly a year after the concerts we're talking about. So it does give you an idea of what he looked like. And then there is a New York Times article talking about that chin rest that our other violinist, Marjorie Fisher, invented. So we've talked about the people. We've talked about the process of trying to figure out all the layers and the pieces. So now let's talk about the concerts themselves. So here's this slide again, just to give you a little bit of a review of what we're talking about here. There's Concert 1 and Concert 2. The program that you see is only for Concert 1. So Concert 1 got some big press the whole week leading up. This concert will mark something new in recitals, as it will be the first in which more than one American woman composer has appeared in person on one recital program. So, I'm not a member of the Washington Post's fact-checking, and I don't assign Pinocchios, so I can't confirm whether or not this is true, but it would be so amazing. I really want this to be true, and it would be, and if any of you feel like taking up the torch to figure out if this truly was the first program with more than one woman on the same program as a composer, let's go ahead and find out. Also, we find out about the audience and the attendance of the concerts. Hundreds of delegates attended the composer's recital. So that was also in the Washington Post. That was after the first concert, the day before the second concert. And some high praise after all the concerts were over. It would be a fair estimate to state that these women form perhaps the strongest quintet of its kind that could be gotten together in this country. These women were famous in their lifetimes. Concert number 2. This was a little bit harder to find press about, and my guess is because the Arts Club, it's a private club, so my guess is that the audience was invitation only, and I'm not sure how many music critics would have sat by a radio trying to write a criticism or an article about a concert that they couldn't attend live. It's only my guess. So what we do find, though, is radio programs today, and I had mentioned this earlier. This was how I found out what was played at the second concert. There was no program for that, so I'm relying very heavily on this radio listing. Special musical program, direct from Arts Club, incidental to a dinner and reception given by the Arts Club in honor of America's foremost women composers. So, now we know why there was a second concert, because they were being honored by the music lovers of Washington, D.C. This is how famous they were in their lifetimes. We also find out that during the week, Washington music lovers enjoyed a rare treat in the 2 performances given by a group of charming and talented American woman composers, assisted by prominent local vocalists and instrumentalists. Both the concert Wednesday night at the Shoreham Hotel and Friday night at the Arts Club had large and enthusiastic audiences. Amy Beach is also an ardent supporter of the radio, for she thinks it aids in familiarizing the general public with the works of American composers. So we're also learning that technology has been helpful for women composers historically, and new music in general. The article then goes on to really just be a biographical feature of Amy Beach, but I did think that sentence about the radio was pretty important, because that was a unique feature of our second concert. And WCAP actually gets listed as a new radio station. The Bureau of Navigation, Department of Commerce, published a monthly pamphlet with lists of call signs and how to tune in. And so in 1923, WCAP, which broadcasted our second concert, is listed as brand new. So it was a new radio station. I thought you would find that interesting. So this is an image of a quaint little 3x5 index card from our card catalog. This is how I found the concert program for the first concert. And you can see that it's annotated, and it tells you that we have concert programs in our general collections for many Penn Women concerts. All right, remember I told you we had 2 copies of this concert program. So something, we like to think about as performers is that, the program, that's the record, that's what documents exactly what happened. Maybe not so true in this case. So copy 1 is clean, copy 2 is heavily annotated. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that our donor of these programs, Theodore Gannon from 1929, is the one who annotated these, only because a lot of the programs, if not all of them, that he had given to the music division, they all follow this same pattern, where there's a clean copy and an annotated copy. So he was obviously an avid concert goer in DC, and he's kind of our little window into maybe what happened. So copy 2, the front cover, it's kind of hard for you to see, so I'll let you know what it says. On the left-hand margin, there's some writing, and you'll get an up-close and personal look in the exhibit. It says, "I send my heart up to thee, Browning." So what he's referring to is song number 3 of Amy Beach's Opus 44, her 3 Browning songs, and she had set poems of Robert Browning. Now, song number 3 was not performed. Only songs number 1 and 2 from the Browning songs were performed. So maybe he was mingling after the concert. Maybe he was talking to Amy Beach and said, what else is there? Is there more? I love this piece. Maybe. It's something to think about. So, copy 1 versus copy 2. If we look at just the clean copy and just what was performed of Gena Branscombe's music, we would think that her songs Krishna, with Rue My Heart Is Laden, and At the Postern Gate were performed. But if we look at copy 2, with Rue My Heart Is Laden is crossed out. And what's written is I Bring You Heartsease, which was another song of hers. Now, I Bring You Heartsease was also performed on the 25th. I can only assume why that would have happened. I know that given the short planning timeline of this concert, maybe an efficiency's sake programming decision was made, let's do less material and do it well. I know that as a performer, that's a very practical solution. So maybe that's why. Another difference that we find between copy 1 and copy 2 is that the order of Harriet Ware's songs was different. So the first 2 were switched. And Boat Song and Stars, because of their gorgeous covers, I have printed editions on display for you. I did want us to listen to a historic recording of Boat Song today, but due to some technological difficulties, I will point you to the Library of Congress's National Jukebox, which is a wonderful project from our Culpeper campus. There we have a beautiful vintage recording from 1914, I believe, of Boat Song, and Harriet Ware is the accompanist. So get thee to a reading room. All right, so now let's talk about the music of each composer that was on these concerts. Music of Amy Beach. So she, by far, had the most music performed. And you can see that it actually spans her entire career up to this moment. We have primary sources for these pieces in the Arthur P. Schmidt Company archives, and also printed editions. Now, something that I think is quite interesting are the 3 pieces at the bottom: Dancing Leaves, The Old Chapel by Moonlight, and Nocturne. These were all pieces that were published in 1924. So my question is, were they hot off the press at this concert, or were they playing from a manuscript, or were they playing from a printer's proof? So this was definitely an opportunity. We don't know if these, I personally don't know if these are world premieres. There are Amy Beach scholars out there who may be able to answer that question for you. But I think it's notable that, especially as a soloist, that she is performing music of hers that is brand new at these public concerts. And then here, just some beautiful sheet music covers, because I can't display everything. You can also see that a lot of this music for not just Amy Beach, but most of the women involved in the two concerts that we're talking about, were very good at doing what I call the Baroque composer thing, where you take a song or a piece and you rework it for whatever forces are needed. And you have multiple versions. So not just high voice or low voice, but also maybe multiple voices, or for a voice with a solo obligato instrument. So a lot of these pieces have multiple versions, and Gena Van is one of them. So let's talk about Gena Branscombe. We have holographs for nearly every piece that was on these concerts. Thank you, Arthur P. Schmidt Company. Adagio from Sonata in A minor. So the New York Public Library is actually the most major resource for holograph, meaning in the composer's hand, scores of Gena Branscombe. They have sketches of this. It's undated, which is why there's a question mark next to the title. So I honestly don't know. But I do appreciate that on all of these concerts that she had provided music for a solo instrument with piano, because either it was solo piano or lots of art songs, and I thought that it was really great. So on display today is the holograph score from an old love tale. It's one of many versions, by the way. She has a version for cello and piano, and then she also has art songs with the same title. The piece was from 1911, and we have a signed photograph from Gena Branscombe to Arthur P. Schmidt, dated 1911, also on display for you. And again, some gorgeous sheet music covers, because I can't display everything. But I love old sheet music covers. I think they're so stunning and beautiful. And something cool to share. I had told you that newspapers were a big resource for me, but also trade journals and other periodicals. What you're looking at here is an ad. And if we think about when we're looking at magazines or newspapers or scrolling on the internet, we're like, oh, it's an ad, right? The ads have been so helpful to me, you have no idea. So on the left-hand side is a really shrunk down version of a half-page bottom ad from the Arthur P. Schmidt Company. And what I've circled for you is enlarged to the right, where Arthur P. Schmidt is advertising new compositions by Gena Branscombe. And I thought it was really cool that it's an ad that has two of the pieces that were performed on our 1924 DC concerts. So I thought I'd share that with you. So let's look at Phyllis Fergus. Like I said, in terms of primary sources, she's probably the least represented in our collections here. But when it comes to printed music, boy, does she show up. The Radio Programs Today article that I said I relied on heavily listed just, she will perform her story poems. Story poems, for those of you who do read music, on the right-hand side, she composes a piano accompaniment, and then she recites the poetry. So this particular piece, The Highwayman, is submitted for copyright in 1926. The index card you see is from the U.S. Copyright Office. So this piece could not have been performed at either of our two Washington, D.C. concerts, but I thought it would be cool for you to see that her things were getting submitted, her pieces, excuse me. Now, again, when I said ads are helpful, sheet music covers, and I have an earlier piece even than this. I have one from 1923 on display for you. When they list other pieces available, that is helpful. So, could titles from this list have been performed? It helps us narrow the field a little bit, but she was pretty prolific, so it's still going to be a very long list to work from, and sadly we'll never know. But this gives you an idea of how ads are still helpful. Ethel Glenn Hier. So in the carpenter's shop, I had a lot of trouble finding information about this piece. I date it as before 1918 because it shows up listed in a review of a vocalist's recital in Musical America, and that article is from 1918. So she had to have written it at that time or before then. So that's where I approximately date that to. The rest of the pieces, we have printed editions submitted to the Copyright Office. And the Opus 19 Piano Suite, A Day in the Peterborough Woods, I have the Whippoorwill on display for you. And whenever I hear that name, I think of the bird call in the Martin New flute sonata. So he's imitating a whippoorwill in the forest, and so that piece she indicates in a play that she wrote, A Day in the Childhood of Edward MacDowell, that her Opus 19 can be used as music, incidental music, before the epilogue of the play. So I also have a copy of the play here for you to look at from the Nicholas Lenimsky collection. And then Down in the Glen and If You Must Go, Go Quickly are other works of hers as well. So this piece, A Day in the Peterborough Woods, was received by the U.S. Copyright Office on May 9th, 1924. So again, was this hot off the press at these DC concerts? Because, and again, same questions as the Amy Beach compositions. What were the musicians playing from? Was it a manuscript? Was it a printer proof? Was it a sketch? What was it? What was it? So again, this raises questions. And again, it shows you that these women were not only still actively composing, but also the place that new music, new compositions, contemporary music held for concerts at the time, that works were being consistently premiered and performed while they were still new. Down in the Glen, these are records, again, from the U.S. Copyright Office. This is Ethel Glenn Hier's handwriting. I've checked it against some letters that we have. So, again, judging by the copyright date, was the Shoreham Hotel performance a DC premiere? Was it a world premiere? Again, what kind of score did the musicians play from? Same with If You Must Go, Go Quickly. This is her submission to the U.S. Copyright Office. And Mary Turner Salter. She also, like I said, was one of the many women published by Arthur P. Schmidt in Boston. And a holograph score and a printed version I have on display for you is the Suite of the Year. What I also have on display, remember I said things come in multiple versions. She also has a multiple voice version that was published in the Octavo series. And so you can see that holograph, as well as an editor's, I guess it was a card used for tracking the editing and printing process from the Arthur P. Schmidt Company. And you can see the various employees signing off throughout 1913 about, when it went to the printer and did the composer look at a proof and approve it. So you can take a look at that. And again, beautiful sheet music covers, just because we love them. And the printed version for the Suite of the Year is on display today. And then we have Harriet Ware. We do not have holograph scores of Harriet Ware, but we do have the first editions that were submitted to the U.S. Copyright Office in the music division. And you will see Boat Song and Stars on display. Stars is especially beautiful. As a hardcore Art Deco lover, the 1921 sheet music art on that is just stunning. So do get a close look at that. And this is the copyright registration card for Boat Song. From what I've read in various publications of the time, this was her big hit. And so I think that's maybe one of the reasons when you compare it to the 1921 compositions that were on the program, that may have been why this was included. So, some resources to point you to. The Performing Arts Reading Room, which is where you come to look at anything from the music division, not just music, but also theater and dance, musical theater. Keep in touch with us on our blog, the Performing Arts blog, which was where this whole story was first revealed. I had written a blog post with some initial findings about this. Our digital collections, our finding aids, research guides. For those of you in academia, you may be more familiar with it being called a LibGuide. we're doing LibGuides, we're just calling them something else, but there are the research guides, and they are coming soon from the performing arts. One of my colleagues is writing the LibGuide for American women. I just finished a LibGuide for dance research. There's going to be one on film music, one on jazz. So we have a lot of great research guides to help you sift through the overwhelming but rich resources at the library. And the bottom link is National Jukebox, which was what I was having trouble accessing earlier. That's where all the beautiful old digitized recordings are from Victor and other old labels. And I really want to thank my colleagues in the music division. The reference librarians were incredibly helpful with, taking on this newbie and me shoving photos in their faces and saying, do these people match? I have no idea. And also the catalogers from the prints and photographs division, because they have updated the catalog record. Goal achieved. These women are described. You can look up their names. The catalog record includes the caption now. And also my colleagues in the concert office for coordinating everything for this talk today. And I also want to thank all of you. This is not an easy room to find. And I'm happy to take a few questions, and then we'll have time for you to take a close look at all of the sources I've pulled for you today. Please wait for the microphone since this is being recorded. So I think we have time for maybe 2 questions. I want to make sure everyone gets ample time here. So thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much for sharing that all with us. I'm curious, you had one picture and it said Glenn Hier, and it did not say Ethel Glenn Hier. And were there names that they used because they had to get published that were script names or things that they also went by, so also known as, or things like that?
I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I would actually like to find out. It's something I haven't had a lot of time to check out. I personally don't rule out typos, only because in the radio programs today article, Gena Branscombe is actually listed as Jean. So I don't know, it's possible. Does someone in the audience maybe have an idea? No? So I'm not sure. But that Ask a Librarian link right there, it would be great if you submitted that question, because that can be a way for me to find out and then get in touch with you. Yes?
So I had a similar question, and I can say from personal experience, since my name can be confused with a male name, and I'm a scientist, and it's been documented that there is a bias, not necessarily conscious, in acceptance. And since this is printed music to be sold, very popular, I was wondering if in some circumstances they used the less female-identified name.
Yeah. I don't know. And also, I
so.
mean, it could have been a situation where it was just a last name, because sometimes you'll find sheet music that just says Beethoven or
Yes.
Mozart. So there is that less evil possibility too. Just allowing for that.
But I wanted to suggest another database that the invention sparked, because the Copyright Office resides here, and it's kin to the Patent Office and trademark and such, and since I work at the Patent Office now, that this has triggered me. I'm going to go into the patent database and
Yeah,
type
I
in
tried
these
it.
names. Oh, did you? Okay.
For the chin rest, unfortunately, like the U.S. Copyright Office, searching digitally is only available for recent records. You actually
No. So I will take this on and I will mail it to you.
Marjorie Marcus Fisher,
Yes, okay.
her violin chin rest. 1937 is the year of that. So thank you. Is there one more question before we all enjoy the primary sources here? All right, great. So I'll be at one table with and my colleague David from the concert office will also be here as well, and I'm happy to show you around what's here. So again, thank you so much.